Welcome, everyone. My name is Jody Roberts. I'm part of Art and Climate Action. Thank you for being here for our first community meeting of 2023. I actually had to think about the year there. We are very excited to have two speakers here today. I'm going to let Laura introduce them. Laura is our constant collaborator from Galleries Commit and Artists Commit. So take it away, Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Lupton. I think most of you might know me from other calls, but I'm one of the co-founders of Galleries Commit. Supporting workers has been one of our 4 pillars of Galleries Commit's approach to climate action since the very first climate action plan that we created. And it is also one of the 8 action areas of the Climate Action 8x8 campaign, which is the 2023 commitment to action that we are leading with Art and Climate Action, Art to Zero, and the Gallery Climate Coalition LA. That hopefully all of you on this call have already signed up to take, but if not, you can learn more about it and do so at the link that I'm sure Jody will put in the chat for us right now. We're going to be focusing the community meetings this year on the 8 action areas of the Climate Action 8x8 framework to support people as they work through that, but also just generally helpful information to everybody. And we're super excited to kick off with perhaps the most important action area, which is supporting workers. Supporting workers may not seem like a direct climate action, but as a worker and artist-led initiative, it's always been really clear to us that supporting workers is a critical foundation to basically any other climate action that might be taken. There are so many reasons why this is true. Could probably give a whole presentation about each of those, but some of the highlights are climate action is taken by workers. So workers need time, support, resources in order to be able to take any other climate action. Climate resiliency depends on having strong community networks. So when we face a future of frequent crisis with the effects of climate change, building strong interpersonal support networks are critical to helping us get through those. And cultures of caretaking lead to cultures of care. So the way we do one thing is usually the way we do everything. And if we're extracting the resources of our team, we're probably practicing an extraction of resources elsewhere. All of this, all 3 of these, everything is especially true when we're looking at the way the climate crisis disproportionately affects workers on the front lines and the way it's one of the most intersectional issues of our time. So it's directly tied to climate justice, racial justice, gender, wage, labor, other inequities. So that said, we are super excited to have 2 artists and activists on the call today who've been doing incredible hands-on work to create structures that support people that make up our sector. Debra Scacco is an artist and the founding director of the climate-focused creative research program AIR Projects. She's the co-director of Getty Pacific Standard Time Project Brackish Water Los Angeles and the co-founder of the Art Worker Mutual Aid Cooperative Contemporary Art League. She's also one of our organizing members in Artists Commit, which is the artist-led sister network to Galleries Commit. The Contemporary Art League is an effort to unify and support the unprotected, under-resourced, and largely underpaid labor force of art workers within the broader creative economy. In addition to sharing information and resources about arts workers in California, they launched a partnership recently that supports artists and art workers to access free confidential help with health insurance. Jordan Seaberry is the co-director of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture, as well as a professor at RISD, Roger Williams, and a graduate mentor at Lesley University. The U.S. Department of Art and Culture is a grassroots cultural organization with a national network of citizen artists, affiliate organizations, and outposts. The work is expansive and ranges everything from national policy platform development to neighborhood-focused local initiatives. Some examples of that: in 2021, they launched a People's WPA, which is a bold reimagining of labor calling for a publicly funded artists' works projects program. In 2020, they provided ideas and resources for community care in the time of COVID. And in 2019, they provided resources and hosted a series of information and calls for Artists United for a Green New Deal to tackle the climate crisis. We're super excited to hear from both of them with their grassroots worker-centered approaches to activism, community building, and support. Debra is going to go first, followed by Jordan. You'll each have about 10 minutes. Hopefully we have some time for questions at the end. And then for any of you that are doing the Climate Action 8x8 campaign this year, we will have our breakout rooms at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern time, so that we can quickly touch base on the status of our plan. So stick around for that. That said, I will pass off to Debra.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Laura. And I just have to say, I'm honored to be here. I'm a super fan of the U.S. Department of Arts and Culture and Jordan's work in general. So I am totally intimidated. So I just want to say, like, props to you and everything you do first. Thank you. Artists and art workers all over the country appreciate you. So yeah, so I just feel very honored. I'm going to talk kind of quickly because there's a lot to go through, but I will share my screen and dive right in. I wanted to just start with a couple of things that I think we don't say out loud enough, right? So Laura, your introduction about all the connections was, of course, spot on. And one of the things that really attracted me to Artist Commit was that supporting workers was one of the core aspects, because that's been at the heart of my practice for many years. So the things that I think we don't say out loud enough are art workers are an undervalued and under-recognized labor force, and the key there is labor force. I think we have to overcome this idea that, like, we are not a labor force because we're not organized. And so something that Contemporary Art League is really trying to do is recognize that and recognize the power in that. Without fair compensation, the art world remains a game of privilege. And I say this because during the pandemic, I was in a lot of Zoom rooms where folks were talking about equity and justice, and nobody wanted to talk about pay. So I think we all know this, but I think this is just a really important thing to say out loud. Without fair pay, we cannot truly achieve equal representation. So we just uphold systemic structures of white supremacy. The art world straddles extreme poverty and extreme wealth like few other professions. And I think this is particularly important because I think that climate also does this. And so there's parallels in this that feel very important to acknowledge and to address within our own communities. Loving your job is not a reason to not get paid fairly. And again, I think that is both for artists, art workers, and also nonprofit work that's doing really incredible work. It's hard to focus on more than your next set of bills when you're not sure if you can make it to the end of the month. So it's really acknowledging that, like, to be future focused, we have to be stable, right? Like, we have to help folks be stable in order to really engage in this work fully. An overstretched and overburdened workforce may have difficulty focusing on long-term climate goals. So again, these are all things that we know, but I just wanted to sort of start by laying that foundation. So thinking about all of that led me to develop AIR projects, which is really intended to nurture creative curiosity and to support artists with access to the sort of headspace and also the financial stability to research climate action, right? So the residency ran for 3 years and was embedded in a clean tech incubator. It was a 6-month part-time research residency where each artist was provided with a $13,000 research and materials stipend. What was interesting was that people kept saying, "Wow, that's so much." And I said, "But it's not. Like, if you were offered a job for 6 months for $13,000, you'd be like, I mean, thanks, but that's not enough to live," right? So there was this disconnect between why I was asking folks to be part-time when they were getting $13,000, as if we should be okay with that, which again is like a cultural thing to overcome. The residency provided research connections with specialized culturally diverse subject experts in the artists' areas of interest, as well as free cultural programming, presenting artists in dialogue with environmental leaders, and free educational workshops. Over the course of 3 years, including myself, the residency supported 9 artists with this support. And each year we would kind of build on the last cohort to build this community of care, not just in the work that we did as artists, but also just in the work that we did as people, right? And really getting to know one another and getting to know one another's needs became a really critical part of what was the foundation of Contemporary Art League. We did everything from, like straight up gallery exhibitions to educational workshops to even studio visits with young folks from Mayor Garcetti's Gang Reduction Youth Development Program. So really, like, being honest with youth that being an artist is possible, but here are the ways that it works and here are the ways that it doesn't, in efforts to try and get the next generation coming up to also think about what are the ways that they want to be in the world to change these systems that are just not really working for anybody. There's also, a series of free programming to also get as many folks as possible into the conversation and really thinking about structural change and supporting the artist and not just the artwork, right? So a lot of what I do is about divorcing the object from the person and supporting the person to be like the whole person that they need to be in order to create the works that eventually move into the world. And all of that work really led to Contemporary Art League, which is, as Laura mentioned, a trade cooperative with a mission to build unity, solidarity, and equity within the contemporary art field in LA County. So in order to get to a point where we could even, my co-founder and I, Karina Pipon, could even launch Contemporary Art League, we spoke with over 100 art workers in the Los Angeles County area, asking them what they needed. And the core things that came up were access to healthcare, access to capital, access to childcare. So these are the three sort of core areas that we're focusing on. And we now have volunteer working groups where we're looking at healthcare outreach, capital, and governance as we try to understand this cooperative business model so that we can also think about cooperatives within the cooperative. We can think about how to support artists in their other careers and art workers in their other careers, and kind of create a solidarity economy within that. So we're very ambitious in what we're trying to do, and we are tiny, we're nascent, but we are also really proud to have launched this help with health insurance that Laura mentioned. So another thing we're really focused on is not reinventing the wheel. So we were lucky enough to pair with Entertainment Community Fund, who are offering art workers in California expert advice on navigating covered California. So we're very lucky to have Covered California here, and it is tied to tax returns, which is a challenge for a lot of artists and art workers. So this service helps folks get onboarded, as well as to see like what the right plan is for them, and you have a personalized navigator consistently. So they know you and they know your challenges, and they can help you with whatever you need. So we're really thrilled and honored to be able to provide that to our community. I also just wanted to mention quickly, as a way to support artists, when I created my first carbon impact report with Artists Commit, in the supporting people section, I chose to try and estimate the labor hours that it took to produce an exhibition of 9 people, which was actually over 7,000 hours. What's really exciting is that in working with Honor Fraser, the gallery in this, Honor now on her press releases lists the entire team, including the gallery staff, including preparators, right? So that's like a very simple way that we can publicly support workers as we move through figuring out the best way to take these actions. So just a couple of suggestions: pay people fairly, negotiate for more than yourself. This is something that is really hard, but I try to practice. I often have to negotiate an artist fee where there is not one. And every time I do it, I suggest a system, and I offer kind of being an advisor or inviting other folks to be an advisor to help institutions build this system. Ensure a safe and communicative workplace, publicly acknowledge the entire workforce, and ask what people need. So it's not just about pay, it's about care. And then that's it for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. And let's go right to Jordan.
Deborah, I'm so glad to be going after you, because you laid such a good foundation that I now get to piggyback off of. Thank you so much for sharing, and of course, everyone who's organized this call and all the others. Thank you for including us, and thank you for giving this, I think, really important conversation the platform that it needs. So when I was organizing my slides and organizing my thoughts, I kept going back and forth. It took me forever to get my slides in to Laura and Jody and folks, because I kept going back and forth about this idea. This question kept banging around in my head, which is, why are you here? Meaning, the folks who are on this call, why, assuming that you're engaging with the traditional art market, at least in some capacity, why are you here? What are you on this call for? And I'm guessing it's because you are like me. And when you go to bed at night, there is this nagging thing in the back of your head that tells you that there is more you could be doing, that there's something else, some way that you can deploy your creativity or your resources or your position to better mitigate the crises that we're facing, that there's something keeping you up at night. And what I want to do today, again, to build off of the really wonderful work Debra's talked about, I want to present three proposals, three, I think admittedly pretty big steps that folks can take that won't get implemented tomorrow. What I'm hoping to do in the next few minutes is just replace the nagging feeling that bugs you at night when you're in bed and makes you want to join this call. I want to get that nagging feeling replaced with the thought of, well, how could I get that done? 5 years from now, how could I start to implement this thing? I want that to be what you start chewing over in bed. And I wanna invite all of us to start thinking about that. Anytime I talk about my work, and I'm not going to talk very specifically about the USDAC, there's tons of stuff online you can find, and we'll have some Q&A where we can get more in depth. But anytime I talk about my work or anything adjacent, I always start in a small town called Sugar Lock, Mississippi, which is the town that if my grandfather hadn't been chased out of after a lynching, I might have been born there. And when I went down to Sugar Lock to try and find the piece of land that my grandfather was raised on, which nobody living had been there could tell me where it was, I met just about everybody around, everybody who lived nearby, including a gentleman named Hardy. And Hardy is someone that I think about all the time in this work. He was 94 years old at the time that we met, the oldest person around in town, and just full of story after story after story, 70, 80 years old, these stories. So thinking about the way that the past was made perfectly alive as I was sitting right there in his kitchen. And the reason I bring this up is because when we're chewing over these things at night in bed, I want us to be thinking about the Hardys of the future. The reason, I think the reason I settled on this idea is because this isn't a group called Galleries Act or Galleries Support. It's Galleries Commit. And the thing I want to provoke today is a re-up of that commitment, a commitment not to today's actions, but to the long stretch goals that will be told by the Hardys of the next generation. So your spaces in many parts of the world through time and geography, exhibition spaces, art is shown only in the most sacred places, in private spaces, in people's homes, in temples, in very sacred, powerful places. And I want us in this conversation to be able to think about how do we rise to that responsibility? How do we rise to that inheritance? If we are hoping to build an arts economy that's more than just displaying work, kicking 50% to the maker and moving on to the next, we need to be able to rise to the inheritance of what it actually means to embody this extremely powerful relationship, not just with the maker and the audience, but with the community as a whole. And so there are three big stretch goals that I want to talk about today. For some folks, some of these will already be underway or already completely done. And for other folks, these will seem like they are 20 years off in the future. And I just want to emphasize that's totally fine. The first stretch goal that I want you to start chewing over when you're in bed is for your exhibition space to be on a path toward nonprofit or co-op status. The reason is climate change is a crisis of capitalism. The drive for profit, ever expanding resource extraction in a planet of finite resources is a root cause of ecological degradation. It forces you as galleries to compete with each other. It forces you, in order to survive in the market, to pay workers as little as you can. If those things are, as I believe they are, root causes of our inability to actually grapple with climate change, then to be able to flip that model on its head is the first, best, biggest step to combating that. So we know that the drive for profit it's impossible to resist. Capitalism forces you into that. The more good you try to do, the more profits lost and the less competitive you are. You go out of business, everybody loses. Co-ops and nonprofit structures challenge this. It requires a necessary challenge to hierarchy, a necessary challenge to the atomization, individualization that we're forced into. And that is an art world that artists are excited to live in. Second goal I want to have us chew over is to support unionization efforts. This is not just in the art world, although it needs to be there as well, but this is showing solidarity with all of the different economies that the art world engages with. Debra already mentioned shipping, art handlers, all of the folks who interact, lighting, everything that comes into play in the art market, all of those spaces need to have worker collective power. So one of the ways that we can, again, just start in earnest on this path is just understanding that really there's no way around it. I want you to take steps to inch toward that. I'm thinking about slowing down schedules, listening to teams better, being conscious of the culture that you build. But ultimately, I want that goal to be collective power for the workers and solidarity for the folks that you interact with as that stretch goal. The third and last thing that I will give you nightmares about is to move toward an artist's jobs program or an artist's core. This is something that you can learn about from the USDAC. If you check out A People's WPA, we created a model for how folks can actually do a jobs program in the arts to build a cohort of artists, support them, amplify their work, and build connective tissue between them. But it's also something that there are a ton of other models for, a ton of other ways to think about. This could be building a city level, a community level, or just an institutional level cohort that focuses on climate solutions, focuses on creative interventions in that. So those three proposals are the things that I want to sort of orient us around as we make some time for question and answer, because I do want to wrap up in a second and move into that, because it's always the most fun part. I just want you to remember Hardy at 94 was telling me these stories that were, again, 70, 80 years old, and he made them come to life for me. And every one of the workers in your space will one day be a Hardy to somebody. So I want you to imagine them telling the stranger in their kitchen about the gallery they worked at, about the gallery that didn't act at all like the other galleries, didn't act like a for-profit business, didn't act like a cog in the market. Imagine them talking 70 years from now about the gallery that changed their life, that changed how they saw climate change, how the neighborhood saw climate change, how the country engaged with climate. I want you to imagine them talking about you as the holder of that impossible, important space that some of us that really believe might change the planet. So I'm asking you to see your workers as future Hardys, and I want you to think about the story they'll tell that stranger in their living room. And I just want you to go to bed tonight starting to chew on these three main takeaways. I will end it there and hope that we have some time for question and answer.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Debra. I feel really interested in both those presentations. I'd love to hear if anybody have questions in the chat, if you want to drop something in the chat, or if you want to use your hand raise function, then I will call on people. And maybe while waiting to see if people have questions, then I always think it's interesting just to hear like how the different presenters respond to each other. And so, Debra, I know you think a lot about Jordan's work, and Jordan thinks a lot about Debra's work, and maybe you have, I don't know, maybe you have like thoughts after listening to that presentation.
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, that presentation was so, Jordan, that it was just so beautiful of like connecting the future with a person, right? I think that's a part of the challenge that we have when we live in this mentality of scarcity, and we live in this like hand to mouth and this very competitive space. And it's like, if I don't do this, somebody else will, all of those things. And I think that kind of projection to a person and thinking about like, what do we want folks in 50 years to say about their experience as an artist or an art worker. That is one of the most eloquent ways I've ever heard to think about this. So I just want to acknowledge that and say thank you.
Well, geez Louise, that is extremely kind, Deborah.
It's true.
I mean, I always love hearing and learning more about your work. And the thing that really excited me as you were talking, Deborah, was thinking about how important it is to advocate for yourself and to be able to recognize how the systems are operating in your day-to-day life. And one of the things that's really tough about how our economy is set up is that it is this sort of, like you said, every person for themselves, hand to mouth mentality that doesn't allow businesses to think more broadly. It's not that folks don't want to. It's not that folks aren't thinking about this stuff. It's that as soon as you start to invest in those people-centered things, you become potentially less competitive. Someone else takes your spot. All of a sudden, the market swallows you up. It's designed to force you into that competition, into that atomized structure. And so anytime you're able to change some of the structure of how you do business so that you're out of that competition and you're able to cooperate a little bit more, it's enormous, and it allows projects like yours to thrive.
If anyone has a question, then Nathaniel is maybe raising his hand. Do you have a question?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to chime in on that note, Jordan, that you're talking about in terms of changing structures from the top down. You know, it's like how can we start to make a strategy that goes from the bottom up that affects top down and trickles down, like Deborah's project over at Honor Fraser, right? They've now changed their some of their structure to be more transparent with the workers that are maybe aligned or more parallel to exhibitions that happen. And I think that that's one of the things that are missing is the level of transparency. And I know that's something that I strive for when working, even in my own personal work, is that someone will ask me, they're like, oh, how did you do this? I'm like, I did not, right? Like, this person assisted me in a great deal in order to create this work. So yes, maybe this work might be under the umbrella of my name, but there are many other people involved. And I think being transparent about that as an individual can start to affect, it can create a more top-down effect, you know, to larger galleries, because then artists who are participating in this exhibition are or in the exhibitions with these higher institutions can say, hey, this is not just me. You need to include this in the writing, you know, and things like that. And I think that I think a strong bottom-up strategy can really can really create a top to bottom effect that can really promote this kind of change, especially when it comes to fair pay within the art industry. So I guess it's less a question, more of just an anecdote. But yeah.
It's spot on, Nathaniel. I don't have much to add, and I think highlighting how on point that is. I know Laura and other folks on the team didn't just do Galleries Commit, they're also doing Artists Commit, as Deborah's a part of, because it needs to be, it can't just, like you said, it can't just be top down. There's got to be solidarity at the grassroots as well. It has to be both at once. So I think you're spot on.
And let's do Haley, and then I think that Phoebe, let's have both Haley and Phoebe say your questions, and then Jordan and Deborah can respond quickly to both of them, and then we'll move to breakout sessions. I want to respect everyone's time that does need to hop off. Haley, do you want to go first, and then Phoebe? Phoebe, do you want to go first, and then Haley?
Oh, sure. My question is, I think, more about how I can gain access to influencing others. I work as a sculptor mainly in clay, but I have a corporate contract that I've been doing for many years where I work with people in tech in the Bay Area. And I realized that so many people, even outside of the arts, feel very negatively affected by the corporate structures of today. And me and my team have been able to make such a big impact internally And I'm just wondering like where I can find more resources to set up programming and create that impact for others, because I feel like it really brings back to the artists that connection with the public about how important art is and how important it is to stay in touch with our humanness.
Deborah, I think that's a you question, my friend.
I can try that one. Phoebe, I think, you know, having worked in an incubator for several years, I can definitely relate to that challenge. I'm not going to lie, it's kind of an uphill battle, because I think that as artists and with the work that we do, there's a lot of education that needs to happen about what we actually do, and also the capacity that we have to contribute, right? So
Yes.
in the programming that I was able to create within the incubator, I really thought about like, what are the overlaps, right? So in my case, and I think maybe in the case of tech as well, it's really, you know, I always said like artists and scientists and engineers are have a lot more in common than we think, because we're all driven by this consistent curiosity. So I think a lot of it is about, for lack of a better term, branding and communication, in terms of like, what are the words that you use to speak to both audiences? And I think you also sometimes have to be a little bit surreptitious in like, you can't upset the apple cart too much, because then people get afraid of changing the structure. So it's like you have to give them broccoli after cake. You know what I mean? So I think it's just kind of like being really clever about the messaging. And also like, I tried to incorporate an artist with somebody from the incubator really often, so that there was like an inherent dual audience, right? And then that kind of brings folks together in a way that also just feels reciprocal, right? So instead of like trying to cram a message down folks' throat, it also caused me to really have to reevaluate my own self-righteousness at times, and my own high horse. And like, it caused me to have to think about this other perspective, which I may not agree with, but if I want to do this work successfully, I have to understand and be respectful of, right? So
yeah, totally. It definitely feels like a pull between, you know, everybody just seeing your metrics and actually getting people in for an experience that they feel.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add that like, it's clumsy and imperfect, and sometimes people, you know, you'll have an audience of 5, and you just got to be okay with that and be like, well, like, this is very slow work. And one of our amazing volunteers, Kathy Fairbanks, who's an extraordinary artist and also a nurse in her day job, we were in a healthcare meeting, and she just said like, I just feel like we need to think about this 5 years from now. Like, what do we want to look back and say we achieved? So I feel like that's what climate work is about. It's like, it's slow and it's clumsy, and we're going to fumble, and, you know, we're all learning all the time. So I think just try stuff and don't be afraid to fail, and just think about the reciprocal nature of what you're doing. It's kind of the best advice that I can give. I hope that's helpful, at least.
Thank you. No, it is. It's also validating to hear that it's like a slow, ridiculous path, because that is how it feels. I feel like constantly restructuring what we're doing and why we're doing it, like every month.
Changing systems is not easy work. So I'm glad that we're all in it together.
Yeah, thank you. That is nice.
I am going to launch 2 breakout rooms, one for people that are doing 8x8 and want to do a check-in, and then a second breakout room for people that want to continue this discussion